Due to his poor family background, Tae-young has to work 12 hours a day delivering takeout, but he is looked down upon by a wealthy young man who is accompanied by a female companion. The other party not only mocks him verbally, but also deliberately brushes against him with their car, knocking over the takeout boxes they just picked up. If they need to compensate for the loss of these boxes, the hard work of Tae-young and his companion that day will go to waste. While his companion plans to endure the humiliation, the young and impulsive Tae-young insists on confronting them. He only has a lightweight motorcycle, while the other party drives a luxury car. However, with his familiarity with the streets, Tae-young cleverly takes a shortcut and eventually forces the wealthy young man to stop. With his interception, the wealthy young man's car has to come to a halt, and the vehicles behind also stop, honking their horns. Under the urging of his female companion, who feels embarrassed by the attention of the crowd, the wealthy young man reluctantly agrees to compensate. Tae-young does not pay much attention to this incident. For him, the hardships he faces are only temporary. Tae-young's mother passed away early, and he relies on his younger brother. As the eldest brother, he took on the burden of life too soon. However, his brother excels academically and is about to take the college entrance exam. Tae-young has saved up some money to rent a storefront, and he only needs to raise a little more funds. Once the store is up and running smoothly and his brother gets into his desired school, he can finally relieve himself of the burden. Despite the difficulties in life, Tae-young has never thought of giving up hope. Moreover, he has a beautiful and gentle girlfriend who has always stood by him. For Tae-young, life is still full of brightness. Due to his exceptionally busy work schedule, Tae-young often gets so caught up that he has no time to eat. However, even so, when he sees a pot of flowers in the hallway of his employer's house that looks a bit wilted from the sun, he kindly moves the flowers to a shaded area and thoughtfully leaves a note with care instructions. On his way, if Tae-young encounters an elderly person struggling with a heavy suitcase on the street, he will also take the initiative to help. One day during his break, Tae-young unexpectedly discovers a ringing phone by the flower bed behind him. After answering, he offers to temporarily store the phone at a convenience store for the owner to pick up. However, the owner further proposes to reward him with 300,000 won. Tae-young does not care about this and simply delivers the phone to the designated location as agreed. However, he never expected that this act of kindness would lead to the police breaking down the door. Even when taken to the police station, Tae-young feels that this is all a ridiculous misunderstanding. How could he possibly be suspected of rape, dismemberment, or even murder? But the police are not willing to listen to his explanation. Tae-young's girlfriend and brother absolutely do not believe he could be such a brutal person, and the two are determined to clear his name. In addition, Tae-young has a group of enthusiastic friends who also hope to lend a helping hand. After gathering together to discuss, they decide to start the investigation from his work records as a delivery worker. Tae-young runs around delivering meals from morning till night. Delivery receipts and surveillance footage along the way can prove that he simply does not have the time to commit the crime. His girlfriend even hired a lawyer for him. After reviewing the evidence collected by everyone, the lawyer was deeply moved and pointed out that the materials were solid and sufficient to build a complete alibi. He expressed confidence in securing an acquittal for Tae-young, helping him regain his freedom soon. However, during the trial, the prosecutor presented evidence that had never been submitted before. The prosecutor acknowledged that Tae-young's work was indeed busy, even providing a detailed itinerary to prove his level of busyness, but simultaneously pointed out that being busy does not equate to having no time to commit the crime. If Tae-young is not the murderer, why did he go to the victim's home before the incident? Tae-young stared at the red dot marked on the map, recalling the order he received that day, claiming he was only there to deliver food. However, the prosecutor pointed out that a normal food delivery only requires 2 minutes to leave, while the surveillance footage shows that Tae-young stayed in that house for as long as 7 minutes. What did Tae-young do during those 7 minutes? Tae-young tried to explain that he stayed to move a potted plant, but the prosecutor immediately rebutted, stating that there were no potted plants at that location. Even more disadvantageous was the retrieved surveillance footage showing Tae-young walking with a box at a certain intersection. Tae-young claimed that the box belonged to an elderly woman and that he was just helping her, and that the elderly woman deliberately stood in a blind spot of the surveillance camera to seek help, which is why she was not captured on film. However, this explanation was clearly hard to believe. Tae-young was momentarily speechless. Subsequently, the prosecutor presented even more persuasive evidence. The victim's mobile phone signal positioning map showed that the phone's trajectory completely overlapped with Tae-young's route that day. In addition, the surveillance footage captured Tae-young taking the victim's phone. Tae-young argued that he simply picked up the phone and delivered it to the designated location as instructed by the owner, but that location was only a few dozen meters from the body dumping site, making his statement even more far-fetched. Ultimately, the most decisive evidence was that the victim had been raped before death, and the bodily fluids detected in her body matched Tae-young's DNA. Furthermore, in the photos from the dismemberment scene, a bracelet left behind was identical to the one Tae-young usually wore. At this point, the trial's outcome was irretrievable. Tae-young was sentenced to life imprisonment, and even his girlfriend no longer believed his defense. After entering prison, Tae-young found it extremely difficult to adapt to life there. During his most painful, helpless, and vulnerable moments, a public defender came to visit him. The defender pointed out that there were many doubts in the case, and many aspects seemed too perfectly aligned. If Tae-young is indeed innocent, then it is impossible for there to be a flawless frame-up. The case must leave some omissions. The defense attorney suggested that Tae-young carefully recall if there are any details that could overturn the entire case, or if there is any evidence that could prove his innocence. Tae-young immediately remembered the bracelet at the crime scene. It should not belong to him, as his bracelet was actually left in his brother's dormitory. If he could present that bracelet, it might confirm his innocence. The public defender recorded this clue and promised to investigate thoroughly to clear Tae-young's name. From then on, Tae-young regained hope, tightly holding the defense attorney's business card as if it were a precious treasure. However, his situation in prison did not improve, as the charges against Tae-young made the other inmates look down on him. Worse still, the prison bully known as the principal had also set his sights on him. It was rumored that Deok-soo's sister had been sexually assaulted, and he particularly hated rapists. Tae-young was beaten as soon as he entered the prison, but fortunately, the guards arrived in time to prevent serious injury. However, he had already sensed that he was being targeted and felt anxious all day long. At this time, 2 prisoners took the initiative to befriend him. Tae-young thought they were genuinely offering protection and naively followed them into the restroom. Unexpectedly, these 2 were actually Deok-soo's subordinates, and in the restroom, Tae-young was brutally beaten and abused by Deok-soo's gang, leaving him with frequent bruises on his face. Yet, the people around him turned a blind eye to it, remaining indifferent. At this point, the public defender brought the worst news again. Tae-young's brother, unable to bear the burden, had committed suicide, and Tae-young's bracelet was still missing, completely shattering all his hopes. After that, he lived like a walking corpse, kneeling and crying all day long. This life had become unbearable for him. That night, Tae-young attempted to end his own life. Although the prison discovered it in time and saved Tae-young, he soon tried to take his life again. After 3 repeated suicide attempts, Tae-young had completely fallen into despair. The prison had no choice but to transfer him to the chapel, hoping that the power of religion could dispel his suicidal thoughts. The prison regularly invited a priest to the chapel to hold services for the inmates, providing some psychological comfort. However, Tae-young remained indifferent while sitting in the chapel. An assistant to the priest approached him, offered him a piece of cake, and spoke kindly to him. This assistant was also an inmate who had spent 15 years in prison and had once contemplated suicide in his early years. Encouraged by this inmate named Young-sik, a glimmer of hope for survival finally reignited in Tae-young's heart. From then on, he began to study tirelessly, doing things he had previously neglected. Tae-young quickly mastered various skills and obtained a series of skill certificates. When he was beaten in prison, he silently endured it and practiced his punches and kicks nonstop upon returning to his cell. During his free time, Tae-young even created a small garden, personally planting seed after seed. Since he was indeed good at taking care of plants, a prison guard brought a flower to him for advice on how to save it, as its leaves were wilting. After a brief look, Tae-young told guard Cheo-hwan that the flower was suffering due to a pot that was too small and could remain with him for care. It just needed to be repotted into a larger one. Tae-young assisted Cheo-hwan, who then asked him if the scars on his face were from being bullied. Tae-young remained silent and did not take this opportunity to complain. He was simply too perceptive and too quiet. Cheo-hwan knew that Tae-young had long been bullied, and he couldn't help but feel pity at that moment. Just then, the priest's assistant Young-sik brought a cake, informing Tae-young that he would be released today and had recommended Tae-young to take over his position. Tae-young was puzzled by Young-sik's kindness, to which the latter replied that he just hoped he could survive. Things seemed to be turning in a good direction. However, at that moment, everything took a turn. That day, a new inmate arrived at the prison. Like the initial Tae-young, he was very unaccustomed to prison life, getting beaten every day and repeatedly attempting suicide. As the priest's assistant, Tae-young tried to convey the kindness that Young-sik had shown him, reaching out to help the new inmate and trying to counsel him. The new inmate, however, poured out his grievances at that moment, insisting that he was completely innocent and had been framed. Merely for kindly handing over a mobile phone, he was seen as having solid evidence against him. He had a solid alibi, but that evidence had no record. He had informed the community defender of his alibi, and then the evidence mysteriously disappeared. Furthermore, his mother had committed suicide because of this. He asserted that the community defender must also be an accomplice of the frame-up. Upon hearing this, Tae-young felt dizzy. The business card handed to him was exactly the same as the one he had received from the community defender. Everything the new inmate had experienced was eerily similar to his own ordeal. Originally, he had resolved to endure all injustices through faith, but when the truth was laid bare before him, he found he still could not let go of his resentment. The next day, the new inmate attempted suicide again, and this time he succeeded. Tae-young could hardly contain his inner sorrow and pretended to remember new evidence, contacting the so-called community defender again. The defender indeed rushed to the prison, and Tae-young questioned him if he would truly provide help if he disclosed the evidence. The other party immediately agreed, but Tae-young quickly exposed him. He was afraid he might have also deceived that already deceased perpetrator in the same way, right? The public defender, seeing that Tae-young seemed to have sensed the truth, no longer concealed it. He put away the recording pen, and a smile appeared on his face. Tae-young's suspicions were confirmed, and the sorrow grew heavier. If this person was an accomplice, it meant that what he had told him about the bracelet being with his brother was precisely the reason his brother was targeted by them. His brother's death was due to Tae-young's trust in an untrustworthy person. The public defender was sure that Tae-young could do nothing to him, so he simply admitted to all the crimes. Tae-young angrily jumped onto the table and knocked the public defender to the ground, but the prison guards immediately rushed in and subdued Tae-young. This act of Tae-young undoubtedly startled the snake in the grass. After leaving the prison, the public defender immediately called the mastermind behind the scenes, asking him to handle the aftermath. If Tae-young had known nothing of the truth, he could have lived peacefully in prison. However, once he learned the details, silencing him became a necessary choice to prevent him from leaking secrets. Tae-young was also unwilling to waste time in prison and was determined to take action. He directly met with the priest, resigned from his assistant position, and resolved to leave the prison to take revenge on those who framed him. The injustices of this world often follow a common pattern. If someone feels their life is extremely miserable, it often means that someone else is silently enjoying happiness in their place. The behind-the-scenes manipulator Johan was engaged in such work. When the powerful commit serious crimes, he steps in to settle things. But Johan never makes a losing deal. The conglomerate seeking help from him was required to offer a specific piece of artwork as payment. Only upon receiving this item would Johan be willing to accept the commission. Coincidentally, the artwork was currently being auctioned. Initially, when the price rose to 2.3 billion won, the conglomerate still appeared composed. By the time it reached 3.5 billion won, his expression had turned serious. The auctioneer paused for 5 minutes, citing the price being too high, and the conglomerate took the opportunity to call Johan, trying to change the payment to a more straightforward cash transaction, but Johan insisted on the artwork. The conglomerate had no choice but to grit his teeth and return to the auction, as his son had caused a major incident, and to quell the matter, he had to follow through regardless of how much the mysterious online buyer raised the price. Until the price soared to 6.5 billion won. The conglomerate's face was pale and nearly on the verge of collapse. Johan watched this scene from behind the scenes, feeling very satisfied. As expected, the mysterious buyer who kept raising the price and competing with the conglomerate for the artwork was none other than Johan himself. He profited immensely through this means and had a dedicated team for handling the aftermath. Once it was confirmed that this matter needed to be dealt with, he immediately called the relevant personnel to arrange for the follow-up. Determined to take revenge, Tae-young could no longer endure Deok-soo's endless bullying. When Deok-soo's men blocked him again, attempting to carry out their usual bullying, Tae-young immediately knocked them all down. Upon learning this, Deok-soo wanted to retaliate immediately, but was met with a warning from the prison warden due to a suicide incident that had occurred in the prison. Deok-soo was unwilling to accept this and, unable to take action himself, assigned a trusted confidant skilled in ambush to Tae-young's cell, intending to launch a surprise attack while Tae-young was resting at night. However, as soon as the attacker moved, Tae-young quickly got up and fought back. By the next morning's roll call, the attacker was bruised and battered, while Tae-young was unscathed. Seeing this, Deok-soo became even more furious. Usually, Deok-soo ruled the prison with an iron fist, which had already caused dissatisfaction among many inmates. Now, seeing him humiliated, they began to gossip behind his back. This made Deok-soo feel that his authority was being undermined. That afternoon, Tae-young deliberately sat in front of Deok-soo, trying to stop the pointless conflict and expressing that he had no intention of making enemies. However, Deok-soo ignored the olive branch extended by Tae-young. Seeing this, Tae-young smoothly shifted the topic to the incident of Deok-soo's sister being sexually assaulted. He had long deduced from Deok-soo's unusual hatred for rapists that the perpetrator was Deok-soo himself. Upon hearing this, Deok-soo's face changed dramatically, and he immediately stood up to hit Tae-young. Tae-young did not retaliate, which was exactly the situation he had been waiting for. As expected, the commotion attracted the prison guards. Cheol-hwan, seeing Deok-soo daring to act out in front of everyone, immediately had him taken to solitary confinement. At this point, Tae-young had completed the first step of his plan. Tae-young's subsequent plan was to take advantage of the cleaning duty to observe the guards' shift patterns and time windows. Eventually, he identified a route that could be used for a prison break. First, Tae-young requested 2 memory sponges from the guards under the pretext of cleaning the chapel, and then, While cleaning, he pressed the keys provided by the guards into the memory sponges to create molds. Next, he used plaster to cast the molds, creating key templates. Later, during welding class, he deliberately delayed his departure, having learned that one guard's vehicle often broke down and would come directly into the workshop for prisoners to repair for free. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he activated the equipment without supervision and cast the plaster molds into metal keys. With these keys, he had obtained the tools to unlock all the locks leading to the prison gate. Unexpectedly, the guards returned early. Fortunately, the keys had already been made, and Tae-young pretended to be repairing a car. According to the original plan, he intended to execute the prison break during the guard's shift change that day, but was intercepted by another prison bully along the way. Tae-young had no intention of getting entangled, and after a brief conversation, he hurriedly left. However, he did not notice that the assassin sent by Johan had infiltrated the prison, disguised as a doctor coming to vaccinate the inmates. Tae-young's vaccine was mixed with foreign substances, and he unsuspectingly extended his arm to receive the injection. After being vaccinated, Tae-young officially began his escape plan. He first used a nail removed from a stool to insert into an electrical socket, causing a malfunction in the entire prison's electrical circuit. Taking advantage of the guard shift change, Tae-young quickly moved towards Block B. Although he encountered guards along the way, he pushed a cleaning cart, which drew no attention. Next, he changed into civilian clothes in the warehouse. Then, using the identification card he had stolen earlier, Tae-young opened a large door and entered Block B. Along the way, a guard noticed something unusual. The door was not securely closed, and a cleaning tool was left on the floor. The guard cautiously picked up the tool, entered the cleaning room to check, and after finding nothing unusual, turned to leave. However, the guard did not notice that Tae-young was hiding under a garbage bag in the corner. After evading the guard, Tae-young quickly climbed into the ventilation duct. However, the noise from Tae-young crawling in the duct caught the attention of another guard. Once the guard left, he immediately crawled through the duct to the back door of the prison. Here, family members gathered to visit, and Tae-young blended in, drawing no attention. Freedom was within reach, but Tae-young suddenly felt an unusual discomfort in his body. At this moment, he had no way out but to push himself, staggering towards the prison gate. The entire process had been extremely smooth, but just as he stepped out the door, he could no longer hold on and collapsed to the ground. Meanwhile, Johan felt that such a life was not stimulating enough and came up with a new game. He used personal connections to invite a high-ranking political official to accompany him to the prison. The prison warden was extremely respectful upon seeing the politician. However, the politician ordered everyone else to leave and then turned to Johan to bow respectfully, directly issuing clear instructions to the warden. After the politician left, the warden felt confused. He carefully examined Johan in front of him. This person was overly young and handsome, looking nothing like someone of high status. The warden could not fathom the background of this young man. At this moment, Johan looked down at the warden from above. He handed a document to the warden, which contained a proposal for conducting environmental volunteer activities at an abandoned factory. Johan's true intention was to hope that the warden could use the pretext of this outside activity to send out the most difficult-to-manage inmates from the prison. The warden naturally sensed that this move was completely against regulations. However, immediately afterward, Johan placed a bag of gold bars in front of him and promised that more gold bars would be given after the matter was accomplished. The warden had always been greedy for money, even investing funds in the virtual currency market. However, he not only used personal assets, but also embezzled public funds for investment, ultimately falling victim to fraud. This matter has now been exposed, and the funds recently obtained by the prison warden have all been seized by the prosecutor's office. The warden himself had already heard the rumors and was originally facing immediate dismissal and imprisonment. However, at this time, Johan claimed to have extensive connections, stating that he could not only ensure the warden's current position, but also help him become wealthy overnight and even return all the funds that had been seized. Upon hearing this, the warden had no objections and immediately agreed to the deal. On the other side, Tae-young woke up in the prison infirmary and was informed by the doctor that there were components of rat poison in his body. He had previously collapsed outside the prison gate and was fortunately discovered by a priest who promptly brought him back. If the treatment had been delayed any longer, Tae-young might have lost his life. Thanks to the health supplements given to him by Young-sik, which contained vitamin K3 that has detoxifying properties, he was able to gain crucial time for rescue, allowing him to survive. Although he still felt extremely unwell, Tae-young clearly realized that it was this kind gift that saved his life. However, Tae-young would never have voluntarily ingested rat poison, and it was impossible for the poison to have generated in his body out of nowhere. Who made him take the rat poison? The answer to this question is difficult to speculate, as there seem to be many who wished for his death. Tae-young's situation has become a hot topic in the prison. Some say he attempted to escape and was caught. Others claim he seemed to intend to commit suicide by poisoning himself with rat poison. However, If there were a prisoner escape, it would undoubtedly be a serious scandal and a failure of management. The guards were unwilling to take responsibility for this, so they tacitly suppressed the matter. The warden lifted the confinement punishment on Deok-soo, but specifically warned him not to cause any more trouble. However, as soon as Deok-soo left the confinement room, he immediately gathered his subordinates to head to the infirmary. He intended to kill Tae-young directly. Cheol-hwan had originally prepared to leave work, but upon seeing the doctor sitting outside smoking alone, he sensed something was wrong. He approached and asked the doctor why he was smoking outside, to which the doctor replied that being outside meant he wouldn't have to take any responsibility. This statement made Cheol-hwan realize that something must be happening inside the infirmary. He immediately turned and rushed towards the infirmary, trying to enter, but was blocked at the door by several prisoners. Cheol-hwan realized that this situation was unusual. Deok-soo was likely serious about taking action, and Tae-young's life was probably in danger. However, he found it difficult to break through the blockade of several prisoners alone, and these individuals clearly no longer listened to any of his commands. Just as Cheol-hwan was anxious and at a loss for what to do, a dirty deal was unfolding elsewhere in the prison. Heads of various departments had gathered in the warden's office to discuss how to share the spoils, forge documents, and transfer prisoners out under the guise of volunteer activities. Suddenly, the entire prison was filled with alarm sounds. It turned out that Cheol-hwan activated the alarm in a moment of desperation, mobilizing emergency forces in an attempt to forcibly enter the medical room and control the situation. At this time in the medical room, Tae-young was still extremely weak due to the effects of rat poison. However, faced with Deok-soo's attack, he still responded calmly and effectively. Tae-young quickly got out of bed, found a usable weapon, and disguised the bed to look like someone was lying on it, misleading Deok-soo and his subordinates, causing their initial attack to miss. Taking advantage of the attacker's unpreparedness, Tae-young suddenly appeared and knocked down several people. In the dim environment, he fought hard, but ultimately alone. His fist could hardly match 4 hands, and his weakened state greatly affected Tae-young's combat ability, leading him to be injured quickly. Despite this, Deok-soo's subordinates still struggled to subdue Tae-young. Deok-soo thought victory was in his grasp, yet he watched helplessly as his men fell one after another. In the end, Tae-young stood before Deok-soo, once again demanding to stop the conflict. Deok-soo suddenly took out a spring knife for a sneak attack, stabbing it into Tae-young's side. Seeing the opponent pressing closer, Tae-young had no choice but to tightly grip Deok-soo's neck. Both sides fought to the death, each wanting to subdue the other. After a fierce struggle, Tae-young gradually gained the upper hand, seized the knife, and stabbed it towards Deok-soo's ear. However, Deok-soo still provocatively taunted, claiming that unless he was killed, he would never back down. Tae-young had no intention of taking a life, but pushed to this point, he simply swung the knife and cut off one of Deok-soo's ears. At this moment, Cheol-hwan led the emergency team into the medical room. Tae-young was then locked in a confinement room, but soon after, he was taken along with other prisoners onto a large truck, sent to an abandoned factory. 5 years ago, the events surrounding Tae-young were not actually complicated. A wealthy young man invited a woman to drink together. After the woman became slightly tipsy and wanted to leave, the young man forcibly demanded that she use illegal substances with him. After being refused multiple times, the wealthy young man actually stabbed the woman to death with a knife. After committing the crime, in a drunken state, he called his father for help. And his father was a powerful figure at that time. 5 years ago, Johan was already a business tycoon with immense influence. At a bidding conference, many companies had prepared extensively and competed fiercely. However, until the final round, Johan's company suddenly appeared, emerging as a dark horse and winning the project in one fell swoop. This act led the wealthy businessmen present to whisper among themselves. Yet Johan arrogantly attended the scene, mocking these business colleagues. He even disdainfully stated that his company's main business was not engineering projects, but focused on data security. It was just that due to his curiosity, the business encompassed everything. Faced with this unknown young man, the other wealthy merchants couldn't help but secretly scold him. But Johan never let hatred linger overnight. That night, those wealthy merchants who had pointed fingers at him had their fingers cut off and turned into sculptures. Johan's company primarily focuses on security services, while ordinary security emphasizes preventing danger beforehand by hiring bodyguards to fend off external threats. Johan's company is completely different. He refers to the aftermath of incidents as post-event preservation. After receiving a call from a certain legislator, he first thoroughly cleaned the crime scene and then began searching for ordinary citizens suitable to take the blame. After closely observing Tae-young's life trajectory, he ultimately determined that this person was the most suitable scapegoat. Thus, while Tae-young was out working, Johan sent his subordinates into Tae-young's home to collect Tae-young's fingerprints and extracted bodily fluids from a condom discarded in a trash bag. Additionally, Johan specially prepared a bracelet similar to Tae-young's and placed it at the crime scene. Even the body of the murdered girl was tampered with using technical means to delay the time of death detectable by forensic experts. Finally, considering Tae-young's fondness for plants, he specifically instructed his subordinates to place a pot of wilting flowers in the stairwell. Under Johan's meticulous design, Tae-young ultimately went to prison, becoming the scapegoat for a wealthy heir. Now, Johan has gathered these prisoners in one place. As the prisoners got off the bus, they saw a table full of delicacies in front of them. They rushed forward without hesitation to devour the food, but Tae-young was preoccupied with his thoughts. Taking advantage of the night while others were asleep, Tae-young attempted to sneak away unnoticed. However, he hadn't gotten far when several red dots landed on his clothes. Immediately, a car stopped behind him, and Johan leaned out of the window to call out to him. Tae-young realized that he had once again failed to escape from prison, although he was unaware of the identity of the person before him. Seeing the armed security guards around made him understand that this person was no ordinary individual. Tae-young questioned Johan why he had brought them here, but Johan replied that the reason was not important. What mattered was that since they were out, they should gain something. He informed Tae-young that a competition would soon take place, and all they had to do was give it their all. Moreover, Johan had prepared a special gift for the winner, and as for what the gift was, he told Tae-young to guess. It would be an extraordinary surprise. Tae-young had no interest in the so-called gift. He only wanted to leave this place and seek revenge. However, for now, he could only return to his residence first. But unexpectedly, the man who had previously attempted to assassinate him at night blocked his way and declared that he had decided to stand by his side. Subsequently, the man mysteriously suggested that Tae-young accompany him to a certain location. Despite Tae-young's repeated refusals, he ultimately could not resist the man's insistence and had to follow him to the place. Upon arrival, Tae-young was surprised to see Deok-soo already leading his subordinates in a state of readiness. Tae-young immediately wanted to turn and leave again, but the man earnestly begged him, claiming that if Tae-young didn't stay, his life would be in danger. Tae-young, feeling helpless, could only slowly approach. At that moment, Deok-soo still exuded an imposing aura, with murderous intent evident in his gaze, and his subordinates had already drawn their weapons, poised for action. Seeing this, Tae-young decided to take the man who had led him their hostage. Just as the conflict was about to erupt, a warning shot from security suddenly rang out from above. The gunshot broke the tension of the standoff, and both sides fell silent. The next morning, the blaring of horns woke everyone from their sleep. They were herded back to the location they had entered the day before, and this time, Johan stood above with a megaphone, announcing to the prisoners that a car race would be held that day. Most of those standing there were not good people, including some unruly individuals. A man loudly questioned Johan about whether the race was permitted, to which Johan smiled and assured him that he had indeed received approval. The man did not believe him and turned to leave. Johan said nothing more and simply raised his gun and shot. The man fell to the ground in response. This scene intimidated everyone present, and they immediately dared not raise any further questions. The race officially began, with each person assigned a car. Some received luxury vehicles, others just ordinary sedans, and some got dilapidated cars. But this did not mean that those assigned luxury cars would definitely win, because before the race started, they had the opportunity to repair and modify their vehicles. At that moment, 2 luxury sports cars drove up to the entrance, and stepping out of the cars were the son of a congressman, Du Jiang, and another wealthy young man.